From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Justin Waggoner is standing by to look at the toll that the adverse weather over the past couple of months has taken on the nutritional condition of the beef cow herd. He'll offer advice on managing post-calving cow rations to maintain their current condition. Also, back in today, Washburn University's Roger McEowen. He'll talk about tax reporting considerations for you livestock producers who are seeking relief from herd losses through the USDA's Livestock Indemnity program. Many are applying for LIP payments in the wake of the substantial losses from the winter storms and now flooding. And later on, with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network, and welcome once more to Agriculture Today. Well, it's well understood now that for cow-calf producers, this has been a straining last few weeks and months with the cold and wet weather that has put a lot of nutritional pressure on the cow herd. Then on top of that, calving season, which adds even more stress. Looking forward, how to manage nutrition for those cows and heifers. Some thoughts from our guest, Justin Waggoner. Justin is a research and extension beef systems specialist for K-State based in southwest Kansas. Just to recap where we've been, Justin, and you've spoken with many cow-calf producer out there, this has been pretty rough sledding in as far as keeping those cows up to a decent nutritional plane, hasn't it?
You know, that's absolutely correct, Eric. I think, you know, especially here in recent memory, this is probably one of the roughest winters we've had, predominantly due to just precipitation events that came in, you know, early on in the winter, and, you know, then some extremely cold temperatures here most recently, and snowfall, and, you know, that's taxing on both the cows and cattle producers. So, very challenging winter indeed.
A moment here on the consequences of this as you've visited again with producers and witnessed firsthand. There have been added difficulties to calving and so forth, right?
You know, that's correct. And one of the reports that, you know, we're really hearing a lot of people talk about is, you know, our cows are simply they're a little thinner than we typically would be coming into calving. You know, most of that's, I think we can explain that, you know, as we get mud and cold temperatures, both of those things increase the energetic requirements of the cow and the maintenance energy. You know, the mud from the standpoint of it requires extra energy for those cows to get up, move around, make that trip to the bunk, if you will. Cold, you know, essentially has the same effect. So when those temperatures, you know, drop well below 18 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when we can see a pretty dramatic increase in energy requirements. And if we didn't make adjustments for that in our supplementation, our feeding program throughout the winter, we tend to draw body condition reserves off of the cow. And so, you know, that kind of explains the situation of where we're at. You know, we are seeing some cows that might be in a little bit of condition, might be a little bit lacking right now.
So that being the situation at hand, as we look around, it appears that the weather is starting to break for the more favorable, warmer temperatures. It's been somewhat drier in recent days. What should be the mindset in as far as managing that nutrition?
So for me right now, I think the game plan would be we have a cow that's calved, and so, you know, essentially that's a cow that's going to be, you know, we're coming into peak lactation requirements. That's a cow in the situation she's in right now that's going to be very difficult for us to put body condition back on her. And so really the strategy that I tend to focus on is we have to maintain whatever condition we have right now. So we certainly don't want that cow to slip any further. We don't want to lose any more additional body condition than what we are right now. And so, I think what it comes down to is we need to understand where that cow's requirements are at, what the forage base or whatever we're feeding is providing, and then, adjust our supplementation or our feeding protocols accordingly. Especially right now, we're most likely in a situation where we're probably feeding some supplemental hay to a lot of these cows. And so we're really trying to balance not only the protein needs of that cow, but the energy requirements as well. And so, really it's a game of maintaining that condition that we have and not allowing that cow to slip any further than what she is already.
But you say, Justin, that the emphasis, if anything, should be on the energy side of that supplement?
Well, I think that's probably the area that I'm thinking about a lot. In reality, we need to pay attention to both the protein and the energy need. And I think a lot of times we do a good job of covering our protein needs. That's, really what most of our supplementation protocols are kind of geared towards. And so we don't tend to think as much about this energy situation.
Now, our hay supplies, quality hay, may be drawn down considerably at this point because of the aforementioned rough winter weather. So a grain supplementation may be in order here, at least in some circumstances?
That's right. And so, we're coming to the end of probably the hay inventory on a lot of operations. Hopefully we've kind of reserved some higher quality hay for use during this period when those requirements are highest. And then I think concentrate forms of both protein and energy, if we're looking at some sort of a commodity blend of, say corn or DDGs or maybe even some sort of a commercial range cube and looking for supplements that are going to provide, energy in the form of a high fiber source. First of all, if that isn't necessarily an option, we can go to concentrates like corn and even some byproducts, can work well in those situations as well. So we have some options that are out there to beef cattle producers that we can use that fit that scenario of providing some protein as well as some energy to those cows.
But once again, in a maintenance mode, at what point ahead of spring breeding does one start thinking about amping up that nutritional level for the cow herd?
Well, where I tend to look at is, once we have about 50% of the calves on the ground, that's kind of my unofficial benchmark of, okay, looking at these group of animals, on average, we know those requirements are increasing. And so that's when I typically advise people, okay, that's when we're time to maybe really start making sure that we're taking care. We've got either, plenty of forage in front of those cows, or we're making sure that we increase our supplementation rates, those kind of things to provide those cows both some extra energy and some additional protein as well. The other thing we can do is actually look at, ways that we can maybe mitigate some, let's say we do see some future, events or weather events that come through. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in a lot of parts of the country right now, we've had some mud. We are drying out to the point where maybe we can begin to do some managing of that and running that box blade, trying to clean up some of those areas where those cattle, typically our mud gets the deepest where cattle tend to concentrate, so feeding sites are especially something to look at in maybe terms of getting that box blade out, scraping those areas up, trying to pile them. If it's an area, if it is a dry lot type situation, maybe look at putting some mounds together, piling some of that manure so that pen surface can dry out. And that can go a long ways as well.
That's along the line of alleviating as much stress from the cow or first calf heifer as possible here. And that will help one economize on that feeding program, by the same token, keeping their condition at a reasonable level.
That's right. What we don't want to do is really create a situation where, we're just compounding the issue. And, I think it's always important to remember that, regardless whether it's feedlot cattle in a pen in western Kansas or cows with calves, that, one of the things that I think is a good index for cow comfort or cattle comfort is, do they have a dry place to lay down? And that's where we really start to see the performance impact in the feedlot is when cattle don't have a dry place to lay down. And I think, the same thing is really true of cow-calf type systems as well. If we can create a dry place, either spreading cattle out or giving them access to a new area where they do have some sort of a dry place where they can get out of the mud, I think there's immense benefits to doing that as well.
Not to mention mitigating the possibility of disease problems for those newborn calves, Justin.
Certainly. Those two things tend to go hand in hand. Can we take those? There's probably a few cows out there that have not calved yet, kind of the tail end of the calving distribution. It might be something to consider. Well, can we take those cows that haven't calved yet and maybe put them in a new, clean, dry area if we have one available to us?
Well, it has been for way too many of our cow-calf producers a grind these past couple of months or so, managing the herd through the adverse weather conditions with calving stresses on top of that. So this is no time for the producer to take their eye off the ball in as far as nutritional management for the herd. That's your point.
Yeah, and we're actually coming into a critical, we have been in a critical time as we look at the third trimester, nutrient requirements increasing, and now we have a cow with a calf at side, and so it's really time to stay diligent in that, and hopefully that we can keep as much condition on those cows as we can, and we don't have a penalty in the form of open cows come fall at the conclusion of the breeding season.
Good input to share with producers, and as always, Justin, thanks for the thoughts. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Eric.
Justin Waggoner is a research and extension beef systems specialist for K-State. He is headquartered in Garden City in southwest Kansas. Several nutritional management considerations for you cow-calf producers to take into account as we thankfully are now moving into more favorable spring-like conditions. Now, tomorrow, right here this same time on the broadcast, we'll have more for you cow-calf operators. If you've contended with anemia in your newborn calves this spring, you'll want to be with us here tomorrow. From the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at K-State, Steve Ensley will be by to talk with us about what he tells us are the all-too-frequent vitamin and mineral deficiencies in calves that his laboratory has identified in this region so far this year. Steve will tell us what's at the root of those problems when he joins us right here tomorrow on Agriculture Today. We'll be back in a few moments here on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and it's our regular get-together now with a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen. And Roger covers today something that is unfortunately quite timely for any number of livestock producers in this region have felt compelled to exercise an option that was created in the 2014 Farm Bill, the Livestock Indemnity Program, which can cover livestock losses to a certain extent out of the USDA. Roger, there are tax considerations when it comes to working with these payments as a producer would receive them, which we'll get into. But remind us what the LIP, Livestock Indemnity Program, is, if you will.
Well, fortunately, the program is there to deal with these tragedies, particularly in Nebraska right now, but in parts of Kansas, up in the Dakotas because of the flooding and the snow melt and just a brutal winter, and we've got livestock death. Yeah. In the 2014 Farm Bill, the Livestock Indemnity, or LIP program, was created to provide benefits to livestock producers for deaths of livestock that exceed normal mortality rates that are caused by adverse weather as well as other things beyond producers' control. That LIP payment is set at 75% of the market value of the livestock at issue on the day before they died, and as the code says, as the Secretary determines. So those producers that are going through these tragedies right now, probably the last thing on their mind are the tax ramifications of this. But my point of this is it's very important for producers that have livestock that are lost and die because of these floods to keep good records. and categorize not only the number of livestock, but the type of livestock. And we'll get into the reasons why I say that in just a moment. And keep as good a records as you possibly can, because when it comes time in the late fall or early spring of 2020 to get your taxes prepared, you're going to need all this documentation for your tax preparer to properly prepare the return and properly report the LIP payments and report them in a fashion that was most beneficial to you. And we'll explain that as we unwind this.
We're going to beat that drum a couple of times here. What determines, to talk a bit about the rules, the market value of livestock?
Well, we tend to have ready market prices, trading prices for livestock. We can figure out what the value is on a daily basis of what cattle are worth or what hogs are worth or what horses are worth. We have auction sales, comparable sales of near point in time, or we actually have live market prices for those. Keep in mind the dollar amount of the LIP payment first is 75% of the average loss sustained by the producer. Now, if you're a contract grower, you may actually raise the animals yourself, or you may produce them under contract. For contract growers, that LIP national payment is based on 75% of the average income loss sustained by the contract grower with respect to the livestock that died. And so any LIP payment that a contract grower is going to receive is going to be reduced by the monetary compensation that the grower received from their contractor for the loss of income sustained by the death of the livestock under the contract.
There are the obligatory payment limitations associated with this program, right?
That's right. This is part of the farm program, so we're going to get into payment limitations. Of course, there is the overall $125,000 annual payment limit that applies for combined payments under the LIP Livestock Forage Program, as well as the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, all these types of programs. So in addition to the payment limitation, an eligible farmer rancher is one that has an AGI over a 3-year period that's less than or equal to $900,000. And that did not change with the 2018 Farm Bill. That $900,000 limit stays there. So if you get AGI over that, you're not going to be eligible to receive farm program payments. Now, for 2019, your applicable 3-year period for computing the $900,000 average AGI is skipping the previous year, so you're going to skip 18, and then you're going to take 15, 16, and 17. So that's how you're going to average. And those are the years you're going to look at to determine whether your average AGI is at or under $900,000. So for a particular producer that receives a LIP payment, and to be eligible to receive those, another tax planning aspect of this is you may have to visit with your tax preparer to employ some type of tax planning strategies to keep your average AGI at or under $900,000. You may have to implement those strategies. So that could include the use of deferral strategies, income averaging, amending returns, making or revoking a 179 election. There are some options that you can do even on an after-the-fact basis by virtue of an amended return. So this is not easy stuff. This gets complicated, and this is what you need to be visiting with your tax preparer about right now, informing them of what your death loss is, what the anticipated LIP payment might be, and then, of course, keeping documentation of all of this.
Let's talk about that in just a second, but a quick detail on the program as far as the, quote, deadline for applying. That's dependent upon the time of the incident, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to submit a notice of loss and an application for LIP payments to the local FSA office, and that notice of loss has to be submitted within the earlier 30 days of when the loss occurred or became apparent, or 30 days after the end of the calendar year in which the livestock loss occurred. Now, if you're a contract grower, a copy of the grower contract also has to be provided to FSA. But I think for everyone, it's important to submit evidence of the loss supporting the claim for payment. So you want photos, you want veterinary records, you want purchase records, you want loan documentation, tax records. Anything similar to that is helpful in documenting the loss is going to be very useful. Of course, the weather events that trigger the livestock loss also have to be documented, and you have to have certification of the livestock deaths that you make by the third parties on Form CCC 854 if certain conditions are satisfied. So there's a lot of procedure here that has to be followed to make application to receive the LIP payments.
You say that one of the more important reporting nuances of this if it's breeding livestock involved, there are complications here in as far as tax reporting.
Right.
This
is why record keeping is very important. When the government issues that 1099-G, that's the information return that's also going to go to the IRS. That's going to have a number on it, one number. And it's not going to distinguish the amount of dollars that were paid for the destruction of breeding livestock as compared to non-breeding livestock. Well, why do we care about that? Well, if I would have sold my breeding livestock, that sale would have triggered what we call 1231 gain that would have been reported on Form 4797. Now, if it goes on Form 4797, it's 1231 gain. That has a different tax treatment associated with it. And often that's not subject to self-employment tax either as reported on Form 4797. So it raises a question as to whether it's possible to allocate a portion of the disaster proceeds to breeding livestock from Schedule F to Form 4797. And that changes the tax reporting of it. Now, while it's true that the gains and losses from the sale of breeding livestock are reported on the 4797, again, the IRS is going to look at that 1099-G. They're going to see that one amount paid for all livestock losses, and they're going to want it to show up on Schedule F and most likely on line 4A. And if it goes on Schedule F, it's not only income, but it's subject to self-employment tax. So what I'm talking about here is a unique tax characterization here. The proper reporting actually would not necessarily mean all of that death loss would be reported pursuant to the LIP payment on the Schedule F. Some of that may be properly shoved over to a different form, and we get different and better tax treatment. But you're going to have to differentiate the type of livestock that were lost, and we come back again to documentation and careful preparation of the return by the tax preparer based on that documentation, which needs to be occurring now.
Right. And one has to think about whether or not, and this would be part of it, whether or not these payments would throw one into a higher tax bracket. It's all part of the overall planning then, right?
Yeah. There are a couple of issues, I think, also on that associated with the LIP payments. And the question I know that I'm going to get, because I got it 2 years ago, is can I defer these into the next year? Right. I think the answer to that is no, because the way the code reads, you're not going to meet the requirement of having a sale or exchange. And that's not the case with the receipt of indemnity payments for livestock losses. They were destroyed. There is another provision that I do think applies, and that's the involuntary conversion rule. The destruction of livestock on account of weather-related conditions and receipt of a LIP payment, I think, sounds to me like the involuntary conversion rules would apply. And indeed, that code section is structured differently. So I think you would be able to defer the LIP payment until the replacement livestock are sold. So if you lose livestock as a result of the flooding, you replace them, you take the LIP payment, and that payment goes into those livestock, and that gain's not reported associated with the LIP payment until you sell the replacement livestock down the road. Again, that's another tax technique that you want to be visiting with your tax preparer about. I know we're trying to get through the current tax season right now, which is an absolute mess. And fortunately, the farm filing deadline did get extended. But this is something that's going to affect the 2019 returns that are going to get filed in 2020. And there's a lot of discussion and planning and thinking that needs to go on by producers with their tax counsel at this time.
Documentation, documentation, documentation. That's the message at hand here. We appreciate you bringing this to our attention. As always, Roger, a pleasure to have you by. We'll invite you back in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Roger McEowen is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. Check out his website and the blog posts that he routinely updates at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. And we'll return shortly with more on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Now it's on to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. And beginning with this information on the ongoing flood recovery efforts in Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri, there are a number of places that farmers and ranchers can go for help or to donate. The livestock losses in Nebraska are now estimated at about $400 million. Many ranchers facing challenges to save their remaining herds. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture is standing by to help producers affected by the blizzards and the flooding who would need hay, feedstuffs, fencing, materials, volunteer help, or equipment. There's a toll-free number there, 800-831-0550, 800-831-0550. The Nebraska Department of Ag staff will gather information and identify needs to react accordingly. That would potentially include the use of the National Guard and other state resources. Now, the North Dakota-based nonprofit Farm Rescue is now launching Operation Haylift. That group launched its efforts back in 2017 in response to drought conditions, delivering hay to ranchers in need. The Associated Press reported yesterday that Farm Rescue is organizing a similar effort for Nebraska ranchers. You can find out more information about that at farmrescue.org. Farmrescue, all one word, .org. The Nebraska FFA Foundation has established a storm relief fund for FFA supporters to provide resources to Nebraska FFA members and chapters in their communities affected by the devastating floods and blizzards. The FFA said 100% of the donations through the Nebraska FFA Foundation will be distributed to Nebraska FFA members and chapters that were affected by the adverse conditions. And the Nebraska Farm Bureau has established a disaster relief fund at the Nebraska Farm Bureau Foundation to provide emergency aid to producers and rural communities affected adversely. You can find out more about that relief fund at nefb.org, nefb.org. Nebraska Cattlemen, working to assist cattle producers affected by the disasters, they've launched a new disaster relief fund. It's organized as a not-for-profit corporation. All donations distributed to Nebraska cattle producers affected by the disasters. More on that at nebraskacattlemen.org, nebraskacattlemen.org. Now, additionally, Nebraska Cattlemen has prepared and is keeping an updated list of federal disaster assistance resources, as well as pertinent state regulations to consider during times of emergency. In addition, the American Red Cross Disaster Relief Fund is accepting donations at redcross.org, redcross.org, and the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency website is continually updating information to answer questions on resources available. That's at nema.nebraska.gov, nema.nebraska.gov. Now, the historic flooding this week in Nebraska and other states is likely just round one of what could be many rounds of flooding in many areas this spring, according to a USDA meteorologist. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
The flooding here is just beyond belief how much damage it does.
Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts talking about the flooding situation in parts of his state, flooding reaching into Iowa, South Dakota, and Illinois. Now, right now, at least, the weather in the flood area is fairly calm.
But there are signs that could begin to change as early as this weekend.
Agriculture Department meteorologist Brad Rippey says there are several western storm systems lined up across the U.S. Some of them could hit areas already flooded. Meanwhile, many other areas have saturated soils, and up north, snow-covered and frozen soils.
And as we see warm weather overspreading all of that northern U.S. region this week, we will see rivers starting to rise across that region as well. And that's probably the early stages of what I expect to be a significant flood event also in parts of the north over the next few weeks.
And further south again, waters in the Mississippi and Missouri rivers already high. Rippey says they will be a lot higher in the coming weeks, and so
we'll be talking about flooding in various parts of the country for at least the next several weeks.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Now, we spoke with Roger McEowen earlier in this broadcast about the USDA's Livestock Indemnity program as a source of disaster relief for producers. Todd Domer takes the time here to go over the procedures for applying for the LIP.
Cattle producers who have experienced death losses or disease due to adverse winter weather could be eligible for compensation through the USDA Livestock Indemnity program. An owner must file a notice of loss with their local county farm service agency office within 30 calendar days of when the livestock loss was first apparent. A separate application for payment, along with supporting documentation, must be filed within 60 calendar days after the end of the year in which the eligible loss condition occurred. Livestock owners must record all pertinent information, including number and kind of all livestock and those adversely impacted by an eligible loss condition resulting in either death loss or disease. Payments are based on losses in excess of normal mortality. Livestock must have been maintained for commercial use as part of a farming or ranching operation, with animals used for recreational purposes such as roping or showing specifically excluded. Eligible adverse weather events include blizzards, extreme cold, and winter storms lasting 3 consecutive days and accompanied by high winds, freezing rain or sleet, heavy snowfall, and extremely cold temperatures. Some weather events affecting Kansas in the last 30 days may meet these criteria. Producers should expeditiously check their eligibility for the Livestock Indemnity Program and file notice of losses by calling their local farm service agency office. I'm Todd Domer.
Elsewhere in the headlines today, trade-related commitments between the United States and Brazil for U.S. pork and wheat were announced yesterday following a meeting between President Trump and Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro at the White House. Brazil will implement a tariff rate quota allowing for the duty-free import of 750,000 metric tons of U.S. wheat annually. That's according to a joint statement released by the two leaders. U.S. wheat growers have long pushed for that quota, which Brazil committed to establish during the Uruguay round of World Trade Organization negotiations. U.S. wheat exports to Brazil currently face a 10% tariff, while countries covered by the Mercosur trade agreement, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, are allowed duty-free access. Earlier this month, Kansas Republican Senators Pat Roberts and Jerry Moran had pressed the Trump administration to confront Brazil over that quota. This development a big win for U.S. wheat farmers, according to the president of the National Association of Wheat Growers, Ben Schultz. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and reminding you once again, do look into our podcast service. It's as easy as going to agtoday.net, agtoday.net. The subscription instructions are right there. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
You sense you're entering a community when you see the trees clustered or growing along Main Street.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
When you think about Kansas towns, most are surrounded by agriculture or rangeland. As you approach the towns, you see the pointed steeple of a church. If it is a larger town, more steeples. And if the town is the county seat, you will see the courthouse tower as well. In the wide open landscape, there is the community of houses with trees and the park. It's a green cluster with the Main Street and the Kansas castles, the elevators. It may be that before you've reached the town, you've passed the local cemetery. Depending where we are, there may be trees growing. Surely there will be the old spirea, some lilacs, daylilies, and clumps of iris poking their new leaves up through the ground. You sense you're entering or approaching a community when you see the trees clustered or growing along Main Street. But there is often another space set aside for trees, and that is the local golf course. Bigger towns like Manhattan have several golf courses. Depending on your membership, it's where you play and you meet friends. I don't play golf. I never have. But a golf course holds interest for me, whether it is a 9 or an 18 holes. The 18-hole course may hold more interest as it generally is a bigger course, taking more land. And of course, it is the land that intrigues me. As I said, I don't play the game, but I have been asked to help improve the course, and that meant the playing experience. Don't ask me about the grass or the fairways. I'll leave that to the turf grass experts. Where I get involved is around the clubhouse, parking lot, and what I really enjoy and see as a challenge is the course itself. The course, or perhaps better said the grounds, I see the golf course as a community park with a special purpose of playing the game of golf. I've seen well-planned, immaculate courses, and I've walked courses where the roughs were rough. Habitat for deer and bob white. Those are the courses I find intriguing. Oh, I understand the frustration when a golf ball goes off course and lands in the rough. I get it. It's tough. But I'm not looking for a tiny white ball. I'm enjoying what grows and can live in the rough. It's along the fairways where trees are trimmed up so golfers don't bump their head, lose caps, or swear when a golf ball goes slightly off. I understand, even though I would never prune lower branches of evergreen trees somewhere else, but I understand why. Years ago I was approached by a golf course committee if I was interested in helping improve the ambience of their golf course. They were talking about the playing experience and the aesthetics of the course. We talked, and I sensed what they needed. I told them I didn't play golf, but I understood what they needed and wanted. Their trees were dying. The original trees planted had been mostly pines and were dying of pine wilt. However, to keep a course interesting, one needs to replant. But replant wisely. To replant wisely, one had to know the course. And to overcome that problem, I said, I will do it, but I will only work with your golf course superintendent. I know him. We can talk together. I highly respect him. He really knew and knows the course, where underground pipes and other equipment is hidden. Also, he knows me. We agreed. We worked with a tree planting budget, part of which was for the removal of dead trees and for the purchase of new trees, which was my job. But first, I had to get a feeling of the course. With a large aerial photo and a golf cart, I started to get the feel. I took notes, was reading the lay of the land as well as the soil. It was like a farm. As I made field notes, I planned my planting scheme and selected the trees which I knew would grow best on a particular spot or site. I looked at the light fall to help the fall colors stand out while playing the course. I mainly worked with trees, large and small, but also used shrubs, hardy shrubs. I meshed them together. On a golf course, a single shrub just doesn't work. It's mass planting. The same for trees. Yes, there are the singular specimen trees, which stand alone as a statement, like the church steeple when approaching the town. As the budget was planned each year, we proceeded to keep planting trees over the years. It was a great project, which I enjoyed being part of together with my friend. I needed him for his detailed knowledge of the course. Together, we did extremely well. Trees were handled carefully and planted with care. We hardly lost a tree. It surprised me to see established trees with bark damaged by golf balls hitting that tree. You could not hit the tree if you tried, but stray balls made the crack. Understanding a golf course, keeping it green, the grass, and yes, the trees, shrubs, and the rough, so that playing is a rewarding outdoor experience is quite a challenge. It reminds me of a farm, but in a different way. And a golf course superintendent who stays with such a course leaves a legacy. I know my friend did when he helped me plant the trees. And long after I'm gone, those trees will happily grow where we planted them. They belong.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. With that, our time's away for today. As always, thanks to you for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.